Hi, I'm Tara, your host of the Be Who You Came to Be podcast. And I wanted to create this little clip to welcome you to the show and to humbly thank you from the bottom of my heart to tuning in to the very first episode of my show, my podcast, Be Who You Came to Be. You know, it's pretty wild. This has been a butterfly goal of mine for a really long, long time. If you don't know what a butterfly goal is, just keep listening. It's going to uncover itself, and you're going to discover these wildly audacious butterfly goals that you have as well. And you're going to get the courage to go all in on them. But you know, this show has been manifesting in me for a long time, and it's something that I always wanted to do. And 2025 was the year that I was just like, you know what, I'm going for it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to create the show. And I'm honored that you're here and listening. So let's take a step back to how this all started. Well, it all started, as you know, over 2 decades ago when my 87-year-old grandmother wrote a note to my newborn son. And in this note was her life's advice for him. She said, "Be who you came to be. Love will guide you." The words still give me chills. You know, that was her 87 years old, and those are the words that she left for him. This idea that all his gifts, talents, authenticities, passions, and purpose were all inside of him, if he would just honor it. And if, as parents and his community, we would honor that and help him become that person. So I sat on this note for over a decade, and I had some major life things happen around that time. I lost my dad unexpectedly, and I was feeling really lost. And the note was a guiding light, but I knew I needed even more than just the be who you came to be. I was like, how can I do that? I don't even know who I'm supposed to be or what I'm doing. And I found through some colleagues a woman who lives in Canada, and her name was Heather White. Her name is Heather White. And I call her the dream whisperer. She has just this really unique perspective, talent, and guiding light to help people do just that, to be who they came to be. And so I started working with Heather, and we were working through my grief, but we were also working through who I wasn't anymore and how I had changed and not really knowing what was next for me. She helped me discover that. She gave me the courage to believe in myself beyond reason and to be who I came to be. And so when the time came for me to select my first guest, how would I want to launch a show? It was easy. I was like, it has to be Heather White. It has to be Heather White because she's the one who helped me discover who I came to be in this stage in my life and gave me the courage to go all in on the unapologetically authentic version of Tara that you see today. Obviously, I'm a work in progress. I'm still figuring out who I am and who I came to be, and have realized that that's not a destination. It's that I'm always going to be a work in progress. Heather, over time, has continued to be a mentor to me, but has also become a dear friend. And I'm so excited to kick off the show with Heather so that she can help you discover who you are, your authentic gifts and talents, and who you came to be. So with that, let's get the show on the road. Heather White, welcome to the Be Who You Came to Be show. I am so excited that you're here. And most of all, that all of these people are going to get just a little touch of your gold.
Oh, Tara, it's just such an honor to be here with you and with everyone listening. I will die happy if everybody that comes into my orbit gets a chance to see themselves in the way that I see them. And I think that's essentially what the circle has been for our journey. I started off mirroring something to you that was kind of hard for you to receive. And over time, you built that receptivity inside of yourself, and you were able to fully step into the embodiment of the deepest truth of who I saw the second I met you. And then the creative contribution you've made since then. It's extraordinary. It's really
Well, it
extraordinary.
all started with you and you believing in me beyond reason and really giving me the courage to say, like, you know what, like, I'm worth it. And I will say that I was at a point in my life where, losing my father unexpectedly when I was 37 years old and he was in his mid 60s, I did have this like fire under me of like, what are you going to do with your life? Like, no one's promised tomorrow and everything can change. But even if that all wouldn't have happened, you gave me so much perspective and really courage. And honestly, you helped me find this little diamond inside of me. Like I didn't even know it was there. And I remember you kept being like, I know this is here and I know this is here. We're gonna get into all that in a little bit, but why don't you tell our audience just a little bit about you, who you are, where you reside, what you do, all
Sure.
stuff Heather White.
Okay, let me see. So I think primarily what I aim to be is a safe space, whether that is in my journey as a parent, as a friend, as a coach, as a strategic advisor, as a speaker, anything I'm trying to contribute to. I always think about this concept that authenticity is something that's so important to me, but it's also something that is predicated on these conditions of safety for us. So, in 2007, I left my corporate sales job to start my own coaching consulting business. It's taken many iterations, but essentially for me, I think the journey has been one cultivating more and more and more safety for me to be who I came to be, right? There's lots of safe what Gay Hendricks calls, I think it's Gay Hendricks, he calls it the zone of excellence, like lots of cul-de-sacs I could have easily gotten caught in because I was a great sales trainer and I was a great corporate communications trainer and I was a great speaker. But like over time, I would always get caught in this kind of little rut where I was like, yeah, I'm really good at this, but this is not actually who I really am and what I really want to talk about. I think back to when I was doing just business development coaching. I would look across the table at my clients. They'd reach some extraordinary milestone, right? Like make partner or cross the seven-figure mark or whatever it was. And I'd be looking at them and they'd be looking at me. And we both knew something that we didn't say. Oh, I'm getting goosebumps as I say this, which is just like, yeah, that wasn't it, was it? And it was
Yeah.
like such a letdown in a way because it was like everything I had invested into the belief if I can steward somebody to accomplishing this extraordinary goal, right, then that'll be it. And then we'd be sitting there and I knew and they knew. We never said it at the time, but that sort of also sparked for me sort of the next iterations of my contribution. And so for me, like this is like soul work, heart-centered leadership. I'm always listening for often what's not being said. I'm always pressing and pushing people to the place where we get to the diamond that you say, or the gold, or the goal behind the goal. Because I've just learned in my own life and also in the hundreds of people I've worked with, it's not enough just to accomplish an external extraordinary thing if there isn't a matching internal place of peace for the resonance of that. And in fact, sometimes the acquisition of extraordinary external goals leaves a person feeling even more isolation, shame, confusion, underwhelmed, etc., and keeps them even more disconnected because everybody looks at them and says, "Oh my God, you have this most extraordinary life," and they're like, "So
Right.
why don't I feel it?" So that's a
Right.
long-winded way of saying, like, this is what I do. I live in Vancouver, BC, in Canada. Probably tell by my accent. Yeah. What else can I tell you? I had my son in March 19th, 2020, literally a week into lockdown. That
Oh my gosh.
completely changed my life again. And yeah, for me, it's about cultivating, creating safe spaces for people to use your language, be who you came to be, right? Step into the most extraordinary possibility of their life, and not just external acquisition of goal achievement, but an internal sense of I am who I came to be.
Yeah. I think it is really interesting because for the longest time, career coaching was such a buzz word. Like, let us career coach you to get your career where you want your career to be. Which, I mean, let's just face it, that's such bullshit because it's not just like we're not put on this earth just to work. And I think it's interesting, these companies who invest in the quote unquote career coach for their people, but it's so much more than that. And one of the things that I found in my work doing, talking with, getting on stages, sharing the Be Who You Came to Be message with companies and individuals and teams, is that the best work in corporate, in business, happens when the people who are there are truly aligned with exactly who they came to be. And that's just not at work, that's personally too. It's like, hey, authenticity is going to fuel the purpose of the people, and then that will fuel the culture, and then that will fuel the results. But we really have to get back to this like common denominator of like the people, and it's not the people at work, it's the people as humans.
Amen. Everything is energy, right? And so if there is a containment of your energy because there's not a flow because of this lack of, to your point, like authenticity, of this clicking in where your life force gets to flow, then you're unfortunately you're not able to contribute at the highest level.
Yeah.
right?
So, 2025, big word is authenticity. Everyone's talking about it. I'm like, oh, I'm having my moment. Back in 2018, 2017, when I first started talking about authenticity and be who you can be, people were like, that's really soft. I'm going to tell you, this is a soft, fluffy topic. And I was like, what? No, this is not soft and fluffy. And through the pandemic and just everything that we have experienced as humans, I think that we have realized this notion of the human connection, authenticity, finding out truly what matters most to us. I mean, living through the pandemic, and then everything else that happened during that time and what's continuing to happen. I think we realize that life is so much more. Life is so much more. So it's kind of fun that this message is having a moment with authenticity. But with that, it is, I think we have to define like what is truly authenticity. My message is be who you came to be, which is this notion that we never reach a certain point in life and arrive. Like we're always going to be a work in progress. It's not like we ever get to a point where we're like, yes, I did it. This is who I am, world. Because things change, life happens, ups happen, downs happen. And so, how do we continue to navigate authenticity when we're constantly in change? Like, how do we ever figure out, like, who really am I at the heart of who I am?
This is such an extraordinary question, and you've nailed it, right? There's nowhere to get to. I think that is the most important thing. And the helpfulness around that is that then there is no like struggle that we have to constantly be in because I'm not where I'm supposed to be yet, right? Like we are always where we're supposed to be. And authenticity, like I said, it reveals itself in safety. So if the context of our life isn't safe, then we're not going to be able to express this most authentic version of ourselves. And that's actually part of the protective mechanism of our psyche, right? That's not a bad thing or a failing or a flaw, right? Whenever I find myself like I'm in retrospect and I'm like, wow, that was a very guarded version of myself that showed up there today. My question or my like flagellation is not like tisk tisk, what's the matter with me? I'm like, I get curious to notice like what about that environment was unsafe for me to fully express the deepest truth of who I am. Because my favorite definition of authenticity comes from the author Sarah Braun Breathich, who had her moment with Oprah. She wrote The Abundant Life. Anyways, like one of those daily, every day. But
Right.
anyways, her definition is the one that just I was like, yes, I wish that was my definition. She said the authentic self is the soul made visible. And this
Wow, that's
is
beautiful.
what I believe, right? In my deepest heart is like the soul. And if you don't resonate with that word, think of like the highest, most actualized version of yourself. It, it revealing itself, right? In any moment in your life. Like that is authenticity. That's what it is right there. And it's alive. It's not somewhere to get to. It's an embodiment of somebody to be, right? And when we aren't
Mm-hmm.
able to fully actualize that, I don't think the failing is necessarily on our ability to be authentic. I think the curiosity is like, what about these circumstances are not creating a container of safety for my most authentic self to show up?
Yeah. I always think about, when was I feeling the most successful, the most whole, when I was feeling joy, fulfillment, and just totally just not worried about like, I'm always like, gosh, that was the most authentic version of me
Yeah, when you
in those
felt the
moments.
safest.
Yes, when you felt that's a such great, it is so great. And we have those people, right? Those safe people that we know that
Totally.
we can totally be with. One question that I get a lot, and I try to be and I pride myself on being like, what Tara Renze, what you see is what you get. The Tara Renze you see on stage is the same one that you're going to talk to off stage. Um, and then obviously I have these deeper relationships where more armor even comes off and I can be more myself. And some people say, well, how do you be truly authentic if you can't be yourself? And I usually just say, well, you have to know your audience. I mean, I have my teenage boys. I'm like, knowing your audience doesn't mean that you're not being authentic. It means that you're being respectful of the situations that you're in, bro. And,
Mm-hmm.
and
Bruh.
so the teenage boys. By the way, side note, yesterday my son comes and he's like, tough outfit. I was like, oh, thanks. I was like, you like this two-piece set? He's like, it's tough. I was like, okay. But this is the side talk of teenage boys. But that is a big question. People are like, well, I couldn't be my authentic self at work because they wouldn't like me, and I, or I couldn't. It's not accepted there, and I think that is a tough line to figure out where does that, how do we be authentic, knowing our audience, and then also showing up truly as us.
Absolutely. And it's because it's contextually relative, right? I mean, again, I think if there was a holy grail to get to, I think the real question we would want to ask ourselves is, am I safe with me? the more internal safety we can create within ourselves, then the more space there's going to be for us just to show up authentically in all kinds of contexts. But that doesn't take away the caveats to your point of like, know your audience, right? Like, why would we prostitute our authenticity in an unsafe place only to have a shame hangover later? To me, that's not me being safe with me. There's nothing kind of worse than somebody just sort of emotionally vomiting all over you and then just couching it and just being authentic. It's like, no, you're not. You're not being authentic at all. You're dumping on me. Like, there's therapy for that. Like, this is
Mhm.
not the right context for what you just did, and that's not what authenticity is. I think the worst thing we can do is prostitute our authenticity and walk away feeling all the internal scars of all the parts of ourselves we exposed in this completely unsafe and contextually irrelevant place for those things to come up. That's hurt. That hurts. That's
Yeah.
harmful, I think, to ourselves. So I think, yeah, it's a moving target and it's contextually relevant.
Mhm. When I was really trying to define for my audience and for the people that I work with, like, what does it mean to be who you came to be? And I kept going back to emotional intelligence, which is being able to understand and navigate our thoughts, ideas, emotions, knowing that those are just thoughts and ideas and emotions, but then we get to choose how we show up. And that's how we can be who we came to be, which is, if you think about all the emotional intelligence aspects, self-regard, self-actualization, impulse control, a huge one right there on what you were kind of talking about with authenticity. But then there's the whole flip side of it, which is interpersonal skills, empathy. Um, and I think that, for me, be who you came to be is if you could get as emotionally intelligent as you possibly could to really understand how you navigate your thoughts, ideas, and emotions and choose how you show up, like that is the highest form of being who you came to be. Because we do have to understand, I remember you were one of the first people who gave me this notion of, you know, you are not your thoughts. And I remember the first time you told me that, I was like, what do you mean? So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about that? Because it's something that I have continued to work on. And I do share this with my audience now around the notion of emotional intelligence. And the more I've researched it, knowing that 80% of our thoughts are negative and they're biased and they're untrue. But it took me a while to wrap my head around that
Yeah, it's a
sentence.
practice, absolutely practice. I remember, I think the first, so I first started learning this probably with my first coach, Bob Proctor. So now we're going back to say 2005 ish. But then shortly after that, I remember Oprah did a series with Eckhart Tolle, and I read his book, A New Earth, and I did the 10-week course with them. And I remember distinctly having a moment where I was like pulling back my comforter about to get into bed, and I heard a dialogue going on inside of me, but there was enough separation between the dialogue and me that I was like, oh, like I'm here and this entire narrative is going on simultaneously. So that was like an insight moment or like an aha moment where I was like, oh, there was enough separation. And then it just becomes a practice. Like it's a practice of bringing more and more awareness. It's a practice of noticing. I always tell people, like, don't believe anything I say. Take what I say and then go and check it out and try it out for yourself, right? Because knowledge is not power. Like only knowledge embodied is powerful, right? And so the reason why it's helpful to know you're not your thoughts is because then there's a space in between for you to have a recognition. Like I think scientists talk about there being like something like 75,000 thoughts a day. Like how many could we possibly be aware of, even if you're a highly sensitive person, right? Like,
Right.
and so there is this repetitive ticker tape going on all the time, judging, comparing, concerning, questioning. And I think of it again as all the various aspects of myself and my subconscious collecting information, frankly, to gauge like how safe am I in the world. And so
Mm-hmm.
much of our paradigm, like this sort of the bedrock of our belief system, was gifted to us, right? It's not even ours. So how we those sort of core stories like the I am story, the other people are story, the life is story, these are core foundational identity stories that usually were not ones that we created. They were gifted to us, right, from the caregivers that we had. So knowing that you're not your
I love
thoughts.
that you're calling them gifted. It's a nice way of saying it.
Well, I've had years of therapy. So perspective is everything. That's the way I see it. Yeah. And the thing about gifts is like you can give them back. You can take them back. You can exchange them. You can upgrade them. Oh, I don't like this color. I'm going to go get a new one. Um, so I think it's just important to know thoughts are very helpful and very, they're like a fuel source, right? But they are not the vehicle. It's like they can be gas, but they can't really be the car. So
Mhm.
it's recognizing, like, again, authentic self, to me, that is synonymous, like, with soul, with highest self, with the purest form of me, with the part of me that won't die. Sorry if I'm, if anything I say pushes too far, like, again, people can just take what they want, but my body's going to die, my mind is going to die, my thoughts are going to die, my paradigm is going to die, my roles are going to die. But I deeply believe that there is an aspect, an essential connected awareness, a piece of consciousness that isn't going to die. That's the
Right.
authentic self to me.
Mhm. Yeah. So, one of the things that really has helped me navigate my thoughts is I got certified also in positive intelligence, and I do the saboteur assessment. And you were just talking about the judge, which Surzad Shamin talks a lot about. If you haven't read the positive intelligence book and taken the assessment, it's amazing. But he talks about the judge and how, like, at one point in time, this we all have this judge, right? That was keeping us safe as human beings. It's why we go up to a pool and dip our toe in, right? Because we want to make sure that it's not too hot, not too cold. And back when we were first, humans, this judge kept us safe, like physically safe. But over time, the judge has all turned on us. And sometimes it can be good because we have that, like, I know, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about like gut instinct versus like your heart and like how people say these things. Um, because I don't always think those are accurate either. I think they can be if we know which one to tap into. But that's really helped me because I do find all the time I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just judging. Like my thoughts are judgy, or my, one of my saboteurs is coming out. And for me, I think really when I started noticing that I am not my thoughts was I wake up sometimes at 3 in the morning and my thoughts are just running. And just so you know, no one wakes up at 3 a.m. and starts thinking about all the great shit in their life. They start thinking about like, I mean, sometimes I'll go back to like 2003 and I'll be like, there was a situation 22 years ago. And then I'm like, why am I thinking this? And it is just so wild that you realize it is not me. It's my mind is just exploding. And it's kind of wild when you really think about it.
Yes, absolutely. And so what you're describing there is your ability to be aware and your ability to observe something that's going on, right? And I think the beautiful thing to think about, especially with the mind and the thoughts, is that it's not something you're doing on purpose, nor something that you can necessarily control. I think the greatest source of empowerment is to come to the awareness that it is certainly something you can watch and observe. You can choose to engage in or disengage in, lean into, lean out of. But the idea that we're going to control it, I think that
Right.
gets us in a lot of trouble. And frankly, there's a little slick move we do where we do that what's the matter with me thing.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I up at 3 in the morning thinking about 2003? So for me, my approach always, like, to myself as a practice and everything that I offer my clients, is can we stay in curiosity and like a loving, compassionate place? Like when my son wakes up in the middle of the night and he's 4.5 for context and he's had a nightmare, I'm not like, why did you have a nightmare? Like, don't you know that I have a podcast to record tomorrow morning? I can't deal with
Right.
the bags and like, where's that going to go? Right? Like, is
Right.
that so? Again, I go back to like creating conditions of safety. Now, I'm not suggesting like I'm a perfect parent and that there isn't a part of me that's just like, oh, for fuck's sake, like tonight, right? Yeah, I can hold that part of myself too. But I also know, like, what does my son most need right now? Oh, he needs a safe place to land,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's what we need too. So I think just knowing that can be so helpful. So when we find ourselves slipping into the like, what's the matter with me, and why am I thinking like this, and why can't, oh, my saboteurs out, like, if we can just slow down enough to notice, like, oh, this is a voice of sabotage, or this is a voice of my critic. I like to think of all those, and like, and I really, really appreciate the psychological work of internal family systems and the work of Dr. Dick Schwartz, because it's, I think, very helpful for us to come up with a perspective that says, I wonder what's going on here for me.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wakes themselves up at 3 o'clock in the morning and starts ruminating about 2003 and the thing they said at a party when they had too much champagne. Like, nobody does that because they want to do that, right?
Right.
And you can't control all those thoughts happening, right? But you also can do something, which is you can turn a loving gaze of safety towards yourself, which says, hey, girl, I hear you. I see you. I got you. That's upsetting. You're thinking about this. It's okay. You can think about that as long as you want. It's like taking away the resistance that we have to what's happening actually helps us flow into the present moment and actually lets us let go often much more quickly than judging, criticizing, beating ourselves up, flagellating ourselves about like, what's the matter with me? And why am I thinking so negatively?
Right.
It's like, that is not a great question.
Right. Well, and I keep going back to the, for me, when I wake up, there was, someone told me, gave me advice once, like, pretend you're burning them all and putting them in a drawer. Like, that did not help. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, you can't burn your thoughts, okay? And you can't just like shove them in a drawer and close it. Like I've tried all the mental things. But for me, it's just been like, gosh, that's not who I am today. It's not, I was being who I came to be.
Mm-hmm.
And giving that, that 22-year-old some grace of being like, gosh,
Exactly.
uh, you know, because I do like I'm raising teenagers, and I look back sometimes on my teenage years, and I get like, I literally cringe. I'm like, oh my god, like I cannot believe, like, whether it was something I did or said, or, and then I just try to remind myself it was like all part of being who I came to be. And I think as a parent, that has been, the Be Who You Came to Be note was written by my grandmother to Ben, my oldest son, the week she was born. And I think it's just so magical that she wrote this note, and then it's become this,
Yes.
it's literally been like the cornerstone of our life. And especially from a parenting standpoint, I think it's taught me, it was the one thing that I think without this note I would have not been the mother that I am today, which was be who you came to be, meaning like he came to be him, not who I want him to be, not who his dad wants him to be. And then how do I help him navigate that? And so as a mother, it has been about creating that safe space, creating that compassion, that understanding, but also that grit and that drive of, getting him to keep going. And so I love this idea of like the safe space and creating it. Like, how would you talk to your teenager or your child? And what if we started leaning into our emotions and our thoughts more like that?
Amen. I mean, to me, this is the entire game. And high achieving women are really, really, really good at not doing that. We can do,
Yeah.
like, this is where I come, we've heard this adage a million times before. And I'm sorry if this is the first time your listeners hearing it, and no requirement to agree with me, but I call complete BS and this idea that we can't give what we don't have. That's fucking bullshit.
You can
Sorry.
say it.
Okay.
Yeah, we,
You
we,
can
we
cut
put
that
a,
out. You
if
can
you
edit that
know
out.
me, you know that I've got to,
Sorry.
we got to have we just went ahead and put the F bomb on the show description because fuck
Yeah.
it. Like,
Yeah.
we're being
Get
real,
to
okay?
me.
And like, no filters,
Yeah.
okay?
So that's not true. Do you know who does that all day, every day? High performing moms, and lots of high performing women too. And I don't take that away from anyone who's not a mom. But I'm sorry, we give things that we didn't get, that we give to our children in ways that we were never gifted to. We are
Right.
constantly doing things that we don't have. So to me, I think it's like, that's not the message that we need, is that, oh, you can't give what you don't have, therefore you should fill your own cup. Because to me, that creates even more shame and guilt and all this crap in people. It's like, no, no, no. I want people to see, wow, look how much you give from this vortex of emptiness within yourself. What do you think you could give if you just like teaspooned yourself a little bit of that love, compassion, grace, forgiveness, understanding, right? That's all we can do. Just antidote. Not like, we have to find these ways to get out of the judgment and shame spirals that we inadvertently get ourselves into, because we actually don't know how to talk to ourselves, but we do know how to talk lovingly, because we do it all the time to all kinds of other people. So it's like, this is a skill we can practice. It starts with the awareness that, I'm not that great at doing this for myself, to myself, with myself. I can learn. Not only can I
Right.
learn, I already know how to do it. This is how I talk to my kids. It's how I talk to my spouse. It's how I talk to my best friends. It's how I talk to my clients. So I know how to do it. I just don't necessarily know how to do it towards myself, but I can learn. We
Right.
can learn.
I just had this like major aha that we have never once since we started talking talked about other people and like how, you know, like we give, and so many times we go, but nobody's giving to me, or my emotional, we have this thing. I tell my family, I'm like, my emotional deposits are low. Like, I've deposited a shitload into everyone's account, and nobody's given any account into mine. But I can't expect them to do that. Like, that is like, why would I? I mean, they're not responsible for making me who I came to be, and giving that to me. And I think that has been one thing for me, and like being who I came to be, just like how it's not my responsibility, or my son shouldn't try to be who I want him to be. Like, all of this comes from within. And yes, navigating relationships is part of it, and I do want to talk about that in a second. I want to keep talking about this mom stuff for one more minute, but I think that that's something really curious about the work that you do. It's never about the relationships and what's gone on and all these other things, because it always does come back to like the one thing that we can control, which is us, our thoughts, how we show up, and how we talk to ourselves.
Absolutely. And let's not take away from the conditioning that women have been in for hundreds of years. We have been conditioned like to be a good mom means to sacrifice yourself and like like we are also living inside of impossible standards.
Right.
We don't have a model. Like we're literally on the front lines creating, pioneering this entire perspective. And then we've been given this crap about mom guilt. Like
Oh
fuck
yeah,
that
this is what I
shit.
wanted to talk about because I had a lot of mom guilt when I was younger, and I think that through working with you was when I really was able to release that, because you were like, "Look, Tara, you can be a great mom and have your own business. Like they're not in competition with each other." And I think that you've been talking on social recently about mom guilt, and I think it is one of just those like perspective shifts of like the negative thought versus the actual positive thought, and like who you really are, and that's mom guilt is mislabeled and it's total bullshit. So talk a little bit about that and like some of the stuff
Well,
that people, because I know you got a lot of messages about moms
yeah,
and people who are like, I feel so guilty.
I
I'm,
know. And
like
my
it's
heart is just breaking, literally just breaking, because going back to the authenticity thing, like how can we expect to channel the deepest possibilities of ourselves if we are stuck in a shame spiral, right? That has us indoctrinated daily into this like slow drip of not enough, failing here. If I'm like, Shonda Rhimes, and I love Shonda and I love everything she's done in the world, but there's this post of hers going around where she's giving a speech and she's talking about, hey, how everyone's asked her, how do you do it all? And she's like, I'm going to tell you, I don't. If I'm here accepting an award, then I'm failing at being a mom. And if I'm at home with my kids, then I'm failing at Chandra. And I'm like, I like the sentiment of what she's doing. She's opening the kimono and she's sharing the complexity and the multiplicity and the difficult decisions. And like, we cannot be in two places at once. I don't like the sentiment of failing because, again, it's just setting us up for, I think, the false interpretation of what's going on. We like what, so if I'm not at home 100% of the time for bedtime, I'm failing as a mom. I don't think that that's a fair bar to set. Like, I just think, how could that be failing? Am I attuned with my son when I'm with him? Am I a safe place for him to be? Have I created a safe, as safe a possible place if I can't be present? Like, have I fed him? Is he in a, like all the things? Like, so
right,
it doesn't mean that I'm failing if I'm not at bedtime. Although I have to say I've been at bedtime every night of my son's life, and that's my choice, right? But I don't
right,
think that I'm failing my vocational expression or I'm failing because I make that choice. I think the bigger thing is like as moms, especially as working women, and so many of us as entrepreneurial working women, like it's a very new land we're living in. So we have to first of all recognize like we have been projected on in terms of like what the definitions of these things mean. Like there's been a projection of what it means to be a good mom, there's been a projection of what it means to be a good entrepreneur, there's been a project, I mean, we used to call it mompreneur. Like we have been
oh my god,
downgrading
right,
ourselves and taking this stuff on for years now. It's like we just have to slow down, stop, reclaim some of these things, redefine it. What does it mean to you to be a good mom? Right? And recognize so often when we're labeling things as mom guilt, because to me, like I have mom guilt. When I have an emotional outburst because I was not able to self regulate and contain my own behavior, I feel guilty. That is a good thing because it prompts me to internally
right,
repair with myself. It prompts me to go and repair with my son. It prompts me to completely change a generational pattern because let's be honest, how many of us in sort of our era had parents that came and said, I'm so sorry, I lost control. That wasn't your fault. That was not really
right.
many of our
Oh
experiences,
no,
right?
no one,
So
no
we're
one.
changing,
Yeah,
right? So guilt is so helpful and so good because it informs us. I've lived outside of my values. I've behaved in a way that doesn't feel in accordance with who I came to be, with who I want to be, with how I want to show up. So that's helpful, right? Being at giving a speech, so missing bedtime, that is not guilt that I would feel. That is grief. That is sadness,
Right.
right? I can't be in two places at once. I'm making an impossible decision. My decision is going to have an implication on my son. If my son had a choice, would he have me 24 by 7? Yes, he would. That would be his choice. He doesn't have the perspective always to understand I'm making lots of choices, but that choice is not outside of my value around who I want to be as a mom. So I don't think that is mom guilt. That's like
Right.
mom grief. I can't
Yeah.
be in two places
Yeah.
at once. I'm sad. So if we called it sad, then we could be sad and we could have a little cry, or we could tell our friend, like, this is really hard. And then we would be able to have a sentiment like, yeah, this is hard because, like, it feels hard because it is hard, not because you're doing something wrong. So that is
Right.
a complete shift in the paradigm and much more
Yeah.
freeing and liberating, I think, for people.
Well, and I think it also shows us what matters most, you know? I mean, obviously we're allowing ourselves to have that little bit of sadness, that sadness of being like, I miss this, but I miss it because there's something else that was also very important to me as
Exactly.
a woman. And I think once I was able to make that mental switch of like, I'm not having mom guilt. Like I'm sad that I had to miss it, you know? I mean, there's been so many times as my kids got a little bit older and I forged this amazing relationship with my boys, it was like, oh, I'm so sorry to miss out on that. And it's okay. It's okay. And I realized, that's what they would say. It's okay, mom. Like, gosh, I'm so proud of you for this. And it was in the 90s actually that I was watching this. It was old Oprah, and they had this was like really. I felt like it was the 90s when women were making such a grand entrance into the workforce. They had the working moms versus. It literally was like working moms versus stay at home moms, which is such bullshit. Like,
So
why would
sad.
we ever pit
Right?
women against each other like that? But what they did is they had the moms come on first and say why they thought like why they chose to be a working mom or a stay at home mom and why they thought that was great or whatever. And then they had the kids on in the second half and they were like, which do you think is better? And they were like, I love my mom. I love my mom. Like my mom is my mom. And no matter what, I love my mom. And it was never like, well, I wish that my mom worked so I could see what it looks like to have ambition. I mean, no kid says that. Or like, I wish my mom was at home and not working because I didn't feel love. Like that there's no, those two have nothing in common. Like it's not what it is. And it was this year, one of the things my boys still do is they write me notes on like Mother's Day or my birthday or whatever. And I remember on Mother's Day this year, both of them wrote me pretty lengthy letters. I mean, I was like, wow, totally like melted my heart. They're 15 and 17. And both of them, one of the things that they said they loved was like, I'm so proud of you, mom. Like, I've seen how hard you've worked and the sacrifices that you've made, but you've always showed up for me and you've always been there and you've always been my biggest fan. But it's so fun to watch your business and to watch you step into this. And I just was like, oh my God, like they just get it, you know? And I think that's when I can finally release it. Although I still have it today. I mean, I have to miss a game Friday night because I'm going to a gig. And I'm like, I told Ben the other day, I was like, I'm so sorry I'm going to miss your game. Are you upset? He's like, no. He's like, I mean, I wish you were going to be there, but like, I get it. Like,
Well, and
he's like,
just
we can
this is
we can watch the highlights together after. And I was like, oh my God, I would love that. Which would actually be
right.
just as cool or maybe even cooler than being at the game.
There you go. I mean, this is the thing, another thing that is helpful when we see the mind is not really the greatest tool in the toolbox from a resource perspective, because the mind is in duality, right? Either or, left, right, up, down, black, white, good, bad, yes, no. And what we need to cultivate is the capacity to hold a multiplicity. That is actually the skill that is going to gift us the greatest amount of liberation. So I can hold sadness that I'm missing my son's game. And I can hold excitement and inspiration because I'm pursuing my life's passion. And I can hold nerves and apprehension because I'm stepping into an environment where I'm going to lean into the edge and even become the next iteration of who I came to be, to use your language, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so our capacity to hold all of those things and not have to pick one or the other shows you that you're living in a heart-centered place instead of a mind-centered place. And again, no judgment to the mind. Wonderful, like Ram Dass used to say, wonderful servant, terrible master. This is it. Like, so mom guilt thrusts us into that either or place. Like, either I'm good enough or I'm not good enough. And basically I'm just never good enough. So mom guilt for everything. And right, it doesn't actually
Right.
give us a chance to hold what, like, the multiplicity that's going on, the multiplicity of emotions, the capacity to process, the capacity to regulate our nervous systems in spite of it all. It robs us of the opportunity to integrate everything that's going on, which actually is what's going to allow us to embody these greater and greater and greater aspects of our authenticity. So to me, mom guilt needs to be rethought. There certainly is
Right.
mom guilt. It exists, but it's
Right.
not all of it.
Well, and I think, when I've had friends and been like, oh, I just feel so guilty, I usually just ask them, I said, do you love your work? And that's really they're like, oh my God, I love my work. I love what I do. Well, why would you feel guilty for doing something you love? But then sometimes it's like, no, I fucking hate my job. I'm like,
Yep.
okay,
Well,
well,
that's a
here we
good,
go.
yeah,
Like, here we
totally.
go. Now you've got something to think about because there's something else there.
Yeah,
They
there
are
you
giving
go.
up something that they where they want to be. And I think that let's talk a little bit about just corporate America, working women, because one thing that we hear it all the time. Women are exiting the workforce. We don't have enough women. Women are not getting leadership roles, which, just so you know, I worked in corporate a long time. You did too. Like, I think that's bullshit. Like, every corporate job I was ever in, they wanted women in the highest positions. They wanted us doing all the things. But here's the thing. We got to a point, especially those of us who chose to have children, we didn't want the job. I was like, look, I don't want that job anymore. Like, there was a time in my life I would have wanted that job, but now that job doesn't match up with my values and who I am and who I came to be, which is a mom right now. Like, yes, I love to work, but I also love to be a mom, and that job doesn't fit that mold of who I'm becoming right now. And so I think that, like, if I don't know who to tell, I don't know how to get it out there of like, it's not that women don't want the job, that they don't want the career and all that, but they don't want the job as it is written right now.
Amen. Because it was created inside of a patriarchy, like, no offense, but it just was,
Right.
right? And so I've got some amazing friends of mine. They have a company here in Canada called Matern, and they've done extraordinary research on what they call the motherhood penalty. Like, this is real. This is a real legit challenge that we have. And here's the big problem is that once again, we've gone into the blame thing, right? Like, oh, they don't want us. Yes, they do. This whole thing, right? What's actually it feels like the call is a recreation of something, right? Because if the role was created inside of a patriarchy where it doesn't fit for a working mom, well, then it's not going to fit. Now we're going to try to jam a round peg into a square hole. That's not going to
Right.
work, right? But there is creative solutions. There's job share. There's so many creative solutions. But if we're trying to solve for the wrong problem, we're not going to create any of those solutions. If the creative question that we ask is like, I wonder how we could get the most extraordinary genius contribution on behalf of women that happen to choose to become moms inside of this corporate arena, then we're going to have all kinds of different ideas that are going to come to the table. If we ask, how can we get more women into this role, then we're going to be in trouble,
Right.
right? So we have to
Right.
ask better questions. We have to move into a creative context. And like, we're really uncomfortable doing that. Let's face it. Well, can't we just go back to the way it was? Like, unfortunately, no, we can't, because we are like part of an evolutionary impulse that's constantly unfolding. And so our ability to become comfortable with the uncomfortable, to ask different questions, to understand that like we have these creative capacities, even inside of like a very structured, let's call it old school organizational chart, like we could recreate things there that could make space
Right.
for a genius contribution on behalf of a mom who only wants to put in 32 hours because she is all
Right.
right. Like, why are we denying that genius contribution just because she doesn't fit into this right box? And
The
yeah,
the job
that's
description.
right. Like, fuck the job description. Throw it out. Create a new one because she's a
Right.
genius and she's got a contribution that only she can make. And it's just this beautiful synergistic thing. Make it work for her. She's also
Yeah.
not going to be a mom of young kids forever. That whole evolutionary journey of her motherhood will change and morph. And you know this better than anybody. Your kids are
Hmm.
teenagers now. And this is the assumption. Oh, like the older they get, the less they'll need you. Not
No,
true.
not
Oftentimes,
true.
right? So let's just remember who we really are, which is that we're creators, right? We have this extraordinary capacity to create, but we have
Right.
to be able to ask questions about like wonder, possibility, right? And go into the mess of it because it's creation is always messy in the
Right.
middle, right?
Right.
Until right? And most organizations as a general rule are like, I don't want to get messy. Like, never mind, we'll let her go, we'll find somebody else. And they wonder
Right.
why like things tank, right? Their culture tanks, the employment engagement starts to, right? And it's like, well, duh. And then all the other women who don't have kids yet are watching the whole thing go down and like, I need a new plan here. I'm going to start my own business, right? And like,
Right. Yeah,
So I think,
it is a cycle for sure. You know, one thing that as a working mom, and I've worked ever since I had my children, is that I've told myself just over the last several years, because you know I started my speaking business, I started writing, I started doing things, and I love you gave me permission to not push, just to be like, Tara. I remember one time you said think of yourself as water. Like water will go the path of least resistance, and it'll go at the speed it's meant to go at. And I think for me, just giving myself this permission of like, I'm not in a hurry. I want to enjoy what I'm doing. I remember when I was writing my book and I was like, oh God, this sucks. And you're like, just enjoy this. Just so you know, you're going to look back on this and be like, oh my God, I want to enjoy the process of writing, of creating. Um, and so because I've given myself this permission of not being in a rush, and now it's interesting. I know we've talked a couple times just over the last few years where I'm like, why isn't it happening faster? And you're like, well, I thought you didn't want it to happen fast. I'm like, but the hyperachiever in me is like, but it needs to be happening faster. But then I'm like, but shit, I don't really want it to happen fast because then I'll miss out. And so it's been this like once I finally like gave myself permission to be like, you're still tapping on the brakes because I don't want to miss out on the back end of these boys, you know, the
yes,
high school experience. I don't want to miss out. It's not that I feel guilty for missing out. I don't want to miss out. And once I finally was like, okay, well that's the reason. It's not guilt. It's not because your boys are going to be upset with you. It's because in my heart, I don't want to miss out. I want to be there. I want to experience it. And once I finally just like gave myself that permission, it's so interesting. Like I'm not worried about my business. I'm not worried about the future. I'm like, it's all going to be there. It's all going to happen at the rate and space it's supposed to. And when I honor that authenticity of myself and like exactly who I am.
totally, totally. And you did something there that you might not have noticed. I want to offer it so that everybody else catches it. So you said, but the hyperachiever in me wants to, etc. So the thing is, what costs us so much energy and what spins our tires so often is the lack of awareness and recognition that we're a multiplicity, right? You have a part of you that's like, I want to be home with my babies this last few years of high school and I will never regret this. And then you have another voice that says, but what if we don't finish this book? Right? And it's in the integration of those parts. It's like helping them step out of a civil war inside of you where if I get what I want, then we're going to write the next book, and we're going to do this, we're going to hustle the speaking career, and we're going to get to seven figures fast, and right. So you don't get what you want. If I get what I want, we're going to be with the boys, we're going to be home, right. And so this is going on inside of us, right. It's energetically taxing for us. What we really need is two things. One, to remember who's really here. This is the authentic self. This is the higher self that can hold space for this voice that says but, and this voice that says but, and can hold space and allow those parts to stop being in a competition or a war with each other, to recognize that actually we can meet both of their needs. This one has to adjust the timeline a little bit. We do that by learning and understanding why she thinks it's too scary to not push so fast, what she's afraid is going to happen, what she's trying to protect you from, right? And we do the same thing by listening to this voice and saying what she's afraid is going to happen if you indulge this voice, right? And before you know it, you have those two voices coming together, riding in the same boat, sitting around your advisory table. So your book doesn't get forgotten about, right? Or backburnered. It's still, she's that voice, that hyperachiever. She's still allowed to help, like, and you don't deny the part of you that wants these things in terms of being home with your kids at this
Right.
particular stage of your life. So this is another place the mind goes to either or. Either I listen to the hyperachiever or I listen to the heart-centered mom, right? And no, it's like there's somebody else here that can listen to both.
Right. I
It,
loved the visual that you just gave of the boardroom in your head. Like, how brilliant is that? I mean, if we actually started, if I started think, I'm going to use, you've never said that before, and this is such gold. The board, like, hey, we're having a board meeting. Okay. Tara the mom's going to show up. Tara the entrepreneur is going to show up. Tara the wife's going to show up. Tara the selfish person who just wants a weekend to herself is also going to show up. Like, all these, you know, versions of me will all show up. And how do we make the best decisions for us?
Amen. This is not my idea. I'm certain. I'm sure this comes probably from years of working from the IFS perspective and other ways. And if this is somebody's idea that I have adopted or taken on, like you can have it. I'm not owning the idea. The real thing I want you to hear is that there's a chairman inside of you,
Mm-hmm.
because we're all very familiar with the parts, right? What we actually don't know how to do is lead the parts. And what we normally do is we criticize the parts, right? There's a critic that comes over and criticizes the hyperachiever. There's a critic that comes over and criticizes the one who wants to be home with the kids, right? There's also a chairman. There is like a wise, heart centered, highest self who's not afraid of all the different perspectives, takes them all in. They're all welcome here. It's like a welcome, benevolent, frankly, maternal energy of like, yeah, you like, she happily passes the microphone around to each one, not afraid of what they're going to say. And in the end, makes an integrated, embodied decision about what is the best for us. So I don't have
Right.
to deny the hyperachiever. I don't have to push away the heart-centered mom. I don't have to never go on the girls trip, right? Like, and this is not about having it all per se. That's also an impossibility. It's about being integrated inside of yourself so that when you
Mhm.
make decisions, you don't have a part of you digging in a heel behind you, creating resistance internally, because that results in us having a foot on the gas and a foot on the brakes, getting really sweaty, tired, and overwhelmed, and not sure why we're not making any progress. It ends up being like we're at the basketball game watching the kids, hustling on our phone because we're trying, right? That's how that looks. When we are not integrated, it looks like us trying to meet all these parts of our needs and we don't do any of it well.
Right. So, gosh, I know. I feel like we could talk forever. I think you might just have to be a regular on the show. Honestly, there's like so many
Happy to
things I
do
want
it.
to talk about. We don't have time to. I want to talk about like losing friends, change, all these things. Like I have got a million things I want to talk to you about. But the one thing that you just said, I think will be a great thing to end this on is your talk on hustle. And so before we started working together, and I think it was one of the reasons I was struggling so much in my grief was because I felt I was I had never been more unmotivated in my life. Like I didn't I mean the energy just to get up and get the kids fed and get them to school and get home was just it took it out of me. And then the thought of doing anything was just like it was just like I was just, constantly it was like honestly like I was like my life was like a treadmill and I just get on and push start and it was like because the treadmill was moving, I was moving. Um and before that, I was such a hustle. I had such a hustle mentality of go out, kick ass, I mean, I was the person who was like, get up at 5 a.m., go out and take care of yourself for 2 hours before your kid ever gets up. I mean, all this bullshit that you're fed. And all of your mentality around hustle is not how we be who we came to be. So I'd love for you to just kind of share that before we wrap and like let everyone know how they can work with you and how we can get more of you. But because I think that was a really huge thing for me was releasing the hustle mentality.
So this is so good and interesting. And so here's what I think about it. I think every one of us high achieving women has an inner hustler, and she is to be revered, celebrated. Like the first thing we got to do when we become aware of her and her role she's played in our life is throw her a fucking damn party and let her know,
Yeah.
holy shit,
Yeah.
it's because of you that I got here. And here is an opportunity to explore the idea that, like, I actually don't have to be on a 24/7 treadmill, right? The hustler has no idea about that. She believes her programming is hustle. That is the way to safety. Achievement is safety. Productivity is safety. Accolades is safety. Like, that's her wiring, right? And then
Right.
we get to a point in our life where we actually create more capacity internally. We start to recognize whether it's external messages come towards us or internal messages like, oh, like, hustling is not serving me, right? And
Right.
then here's the mistake we make, I think, and this is where sort of our culture has steered us wrong, is we begin to criticize ourselves for having the hustler and we start
Hmm.
beating up the hustler. And we hear things like, your old life is going to cost you, your new life is going to cost you your old life. Part of you has to die so that you like that
Right.
is so think about being an internal part of your psyche. Like visualize there's a girl inside of you who's probably like somewhere between 8 and 15 who got the message. How I stay safe and alive is hustle. Like just get it done, make it happen, right? And then she's been doing that for so take however long you are and go back to 8. That's how long she's been doing that on your behalf, unbeknownst to you. No accolades, no awards, no nothing, just and then the
Hmm.
first time you become aware of her, the message she gets is death to you. You are out of here.
You're fucking out of the
You are
squad. Like,
fired, right? Imagine. So what does she do? She doubles down, she goes underground, she gets more sly and slick. So suddenly it
right.
manifests and you doing all kinds of things that you think are like wellness, but you're getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to meditate. Like the hustler
Right.
still, there
Yeah,
she is.
get up to do yoga and
Right,
treat yourself to some
right,
meditation. The hustler's
right.
like, I'm gonna sneak this in. That's hilarious.
Exactly. In your case, I was acutely aware in the moment, like, oh, there was a griever here. And
Right.
she needed us to cast her, right? And that did not require the hustler to die. In fact, it was a beautiful thing. The hustler could take a break for a second, a break she'd never had, so that we could hold the one who was grieving,
Oh
right?
God.
Hold
Yeah.
her, be with her, let her know we so get it, and this is so hard. And you're not supposed to. There's grief doesn't have a timeline. Like, oh, your dad died 6 weeks ago, 6 months ago, 6 years ago, so you should be over it. Forget that bullshit. The most beautiful thing I've heard about grief is like a rock that goes in your pocket. At first, it feels like it's a boulder, like it's huge every step you take, right? But over time, you get stronger and stronger and more acclimated to walking with it. And eventually, it's just like one of those beautiful little gemstones that you stick in your bra. It doesn't go anywhere, right? So we're not trying to get rid of it. In fact, we're not trying to get rid of any parts of ourselves. We're not trying to get rid of the hustler. We're not trying to get rid of the one who's grieving. We're not trying to get rid of the one who wants just a little bit of time and space for themselves. What we really want to do is get into the world of integration. You cannot integrate something you don't know about, and you
Mm-hmm.
cannot know about something that you are unwilling to notice. So that's what I want to say about this. And I want to say to the hustlers, like, oh God, thank you. And we need you and we want you. And would you like to take a break every once in a while? Because you could, like, and what I want to say to the ones who want to be heart centered moms, like, thank God for you, because we're going to raise attached, securely attached, beautiful generation of kids who are not going to have to end up disconnected from themselves, disassociated from their emotions, right? We're going to raise a completely different generation of children because of that, because of our willingness to integrate, right? And so, in order to integrate, we have to notice, and we have to notice from a place of authenticity. It's our authentic self that can hold all of our other selves. So, then we can be who we came to be. Then we can do it, right?
Yeah, so beautiful. And if anyone else is teary eyed, it's part of the Heather White experience. And I was like, Heather, I'm crying every time I would we get and I think it's because the truths are there, right? The realization, and I also think it's the permission of like, oh my gosh, like, and I think it's also this like higher love for ourself, this higher love that
Absolutely.
we have and like that we're embracing it and being there. So first off,
Yes.
before we end, do you put crystals in your bra?
Sometimes.
You do? What kind? Maybe I should. Maybe I'm missing out. I've got a ton of crystals in my
Okay,
house.
so
Do I just
again,
start?
whoa, whoa. Hey, hustler Tara, you slow pop the brakes over there, girl. Again, there's also a lot of ideas that like don't put any of that stuff around your body, right? So, so once in a while,
Oh,
yeah, I'll tuck some rose quartz in too.
oh, I love the
But
rose quartz. Yeah.
again, I think there's literally no one way to do anything. And what's more important is like what is the energy in which you're doing it in? So
Mm-hmm.
many of us, the energy in which we're doing things in, and this is not a judgment, this is just something to notice, is like, if I just put rose quartz in my bra, read one more book, take one more course, study with
Right.
the guru, right?
Right.
Then I'll be it, right? And that is pointing towards something, right? Which is that inside of you is a part of you that got a message a long time ago that's a lie. And the lie is that there's something fundamentally wrong, not good enough, too much, unworthy about you, right? So
Right.
there's a vacuum in there that we're trying, right? So I say that because the best thing you can do is notice that, turn towards it, because there's a little girl in there or a little guy that needs a different message, right?
Right.
It's not
I heard you
true.
say the other day, you were like, I'm so tired of people saying, oh, I need to take the course. I need to read the book. And I remember at one point in time, you're like, why do you keep saying that you need another certification? Like, that's such, but it's really just the excuse, right? Of like, I'm not ready. I'm not enough. I'm not there.
Yeah. And so when you can find the part of you that is feeling that way and turn towards her and like not browbeat her, like, you are worth, like, no, no, no. It's like, hey, girl, tell me, like, what are you feeling? What are you noticing? Like, oh
Right.
my God, if I don't get certified, then people are going to think that I'm a charlatan. And if I'm a charlatan, maybe I'll fuck up somebody's life because I'll say the wrong thing on stage and they'll go home and God forbid do something like, right. So these are very real conversations to have with yourself. And then you can
Mm-hmm.
wrap your arms around that part and say, those are real concerns and I got you. And sometimes they're real concerns that we can solve for, right? Like a certification would solve for it. But we don't
Right.
go for a certification because we're stuck in a story of not being good enough, because there will never be enough certifications to, to, right, to band-aid over the not good
Right.
enoughness.
Right. Right.
Anyway,
Heather White,
I
I
love
love you
you.
so much. This conversation has been so incredible. I'm sure everyone who's listening is thinking like, "Oh my God, how do I get more of Heather?" Well, you can have more of Heather. She is. You are taking new clients currently, correct? Tell us
Yeah,
just about your work, how you work, where they can find you, all that.
absolutely. I mean, you can find me. The easiest place to find me is heatherwhite.ca, Canadian.
Yes.
I love to hang out on Instagram, um,
What's
where
your
I'll
are you? What's your Instagram handle? We'll
Heather
put it in the show
underscore
notes.
white. I
But
think it's underscore Heather underscore white. I had to have a different one because of the commonality of my name. It is what it is. So I like to hang out on there. And I do offer coaching, one-on-one coaching. I have for many years. And I have a couple of, I'm going to call them group experiences. And the reason for that is actually my own internal work. What I have discovered lately is that we need each other more than ever, like mirror neurons, recognition, like powerful women sitting together in a group to realize, like, oh, I'm not the only one. So I'm doing more and more group things for that reason, because I feel there's a transformation that's possible at a much expedited rate than just one-on-one. I will always be a person to sit in one-on-one and be that person that believes in you before you believe in yourself. I've lost track of how many people have started businesses and launched political careers and written books, and right, because I want to be that person that just believes in the dream that's inside of them until they make it real in the world. But that's the best place to find me.
And you were that for me, 100%. Gave me the courage. I do. I laugh with people. I'm like, and she gave me so much courage that I did it. And then like a year in, I called her up and I was like, "You're the one who got me into this
Yeah,
mess." Like,
help. Yeah.
I was like, I need some more help because I feel like this is really messy, and it's all you, Heather White, because you're
Yeah,
the one who believed in me beyond reason and told me to go do it. But
absolutely. I'm here for the mess. I'm here for the courage. I'm here for the launch. I'm here for the mess. I'm here for the honeymoon. I'm here for it all.
oh, well, I just can't tell the listeners enough like how amazing you are. I'm sure everyone listening today knows it. And you do have a podcast out there. You haven't done a new episode for a while, but that first season is gold.
Oh my God, Tara, thank
What's
you.
it called?
It's well, so there it's gonna have to have a new name. That's a whole nother story we can get into. My own internal barriers and inner glass ceilings. The podcast is called the Authenticity Addicts Podcast. Um, the use of the word addict was purposeful in the sense that I really wanted to create a context where people understood that our like ongoing pursuit of authenticity is the best addiction that we can have, because it is this unfolding, like to your point, never arriving place. And then I got really scared of the use of the word addict. And this was around the time that cancel culture began to happen. And I was like,
Oh.
just kidding, I'm out. And then I had a baby. So I haven't been back there yet. So yes, it lives there. The initial season lives. Go listen to it, the Authenticity
Oh
Addicts
my God, I
podcast. I
love
believe I believe there is really, really great content in there. And one
it.
day soon I'll
Is
come back when I figure
it
out
is
what
so
to call
good.
it.
It is so good. And we'll have you as a continued guest on the show. And
Love to.
for the listeners, Heather, keep me informed. Go follow her, give her a follow on Instagram, reach out to her. And then if you let me know when you're having any of these retreats or upcoming meetups or whatever you're calling them,
Yep.
let me know and I'll let the listeners
I
know.
would love
So
that. I love
thank
you
you so
so
much
much.
for being on the podcast today. The first guest on the Be Who You Came to Be podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. We hope you'll be back for our next episode. Until then, keep shining and be who you came to be.